All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here, we're taking a look at Louisville football and are the Cardinals a sleeping giant to make a push for the college football playoff in 2025? We're going to start with some of the work they did in the transfer portal and then look at some of the exciting returnees they have to this roster that's going to help set them up for this potential big 2025 season. Getting started, when it comes to notables, they didn't have too many of them, but I think they did a good job of filling out this roster in terms of depth and potential starters, especially, in the trenches. We'll start with this offensive line. They return a couple of starters, but most importantly, they went out and grabbed, 6 offensive linemen. Jordan Church is probably the best one, 6'4", 315. He was a good left guard for FAU last season, had a very stout season. He's going to have competition from Near Jackson. He was a below-average starter for FIU, but does have that experience. Carter Gillemu was a standout for Southeast Missouri State, but he's drastically undersized. Nick, 6'2", 282, so it'll be interesting to see the game plan for him. Mikaelan Ponders from Mississippi State, on the other hand, has over 1,400 snaps over the last 3 years of left tackle, but he really wasn't that good in any of those seasons. And then Mohamed Musaya played left tackle and left guard at Purdue, so he's probably going to have some type of role like that now that he reunites with Brom. Struggled bad in pass pro this past season in the Big Ten. The ones that are standouts, Nick, are going to be Mosau and Church, but the other ones here, what do you think the vision is with them? Because some of these players are either not very good or undersized.
I think Church was a really good add out of Florida Atlantic guy that previously played at IMG for his high school football, 6'4", 315, got good experience at FAU last year. I think he'd been an instant impact right there at left guard, a very physically strong athlete that you could plug in early on and get really solid reps out of, in my opinion. Near Jackson has been solid as well. Got good experience at FIU, although, they did not have a great season, and he, was hoping to perform a little bit better, but he ends up getting a nice transfer here, 6'7", 320. It's a huge guy right there. You can move him around a little bit. I think you want to probably play him at guard, but we'll see if he can win a position in that part of the offensive line. Pounders coming over from Mississippi State. Previously was at Memphis as well. Has some experience playing high-level football in the SEC, but just was not very good. Transfers to Louisville, seeing if he can get a fresh start. I think this could be a solid addition potentially. Might want to move him around. He previously played on the left side of the line. Mostly going to play on the right side of the line here. Not sure how well that's going to work out. Certainly has to keep an eye on that throughout the season, but he's a guy that's got some size that could certainly be involved in this offensive line. And then Musaya as well, coming in from Indianapolis area. He was solid at Purdue when he got some reps. He's a guy that's been around the sport for a little bit of time now, 6'4", 300 pounds. He should be involved in the offensive line as well, maybe left tackle, but they have a solid starter there returning from last year. Maybe they move him to the right side as well and see what they can do there. I think it's solid that they're addressing the trenches, right? When you compete against the high-level programs in the Big Ten and the SEC, you have to be very strong in the trenches, and the team wants to compete for a playoff spot, which is some of the expectations that are starting to build down there in Kentucky. I think you have to start building the trenches and attacking the portal. Getting really solid contributors on the offensive line is a key way to start.
This is a really good offensive line a season ago as well. Pass protection was very stout. The rushing attack had 185 yards per game, so this was a unit that was very good, and they're going to look to continue to have great consistency, but there's a lot of plug-and-play guys here, a lot of depth. It'll be interesting to see what they do with this starting five, because they do have a lot of returnees as well. They have experience in this program. Looking at the defensive side of things when it comes to the trenches, the top addition here, was on 3 portal ranking, was pretty weak. It was well outside the top 1,000, but Wesley Bailey from Rutgers, clearly a forgotten player, Nick. This is a guy who played for Shiano for a couple of seasons, had an injury early on last season that certainly held him back tremendously. But in the past, he's been a respectable contributor for that defense. He had 4.5 TFL back in 23, 8 TFL and 3.5 sacks in 2022. The Canadian native, he's got good size, 6'5", 265 pounds, so nice edge player there. Cleve Lebin, this is probably the best one, a very underrated player from Coastal Carolina. He was phenomenal for them, highly efficient player, 9.5 sacks, over 12 tackles for loss as well. So I really like those additions on the edge department. When it comes to what they did on the interior, Denzel Lowry, he's a player who's 6'1", 280, another one of those undersized cats. But he was a nice contributor for Old Dominion, played a lot of snaps. And then Jerry Lawson from Albaline Christian, he's 6'2", 295. Both those guys got long leashes at their respective schools, so it'll be interesting to see how they can do transitioning to the ACC now. What do you make of what they did on this side of the ball, Nick? Because no real splashes, but Lubin, obviously, he's got a lot of upside, and then Wesley Bailey, I think he's being a little bit disrespected. He's kind of a forgotten player who's going to have a good resurgent season for Louisville.
Bailey struggled to find minutes for Rutgers last year, played in only 4 games total, had 3 tackles against Wisconsin in October, had a decent showing against Nebraska as well in October, but outside of that, he was not really involved in the defense his career. He had a better year in 2023, right? Had 4.5 tackles for loss, 4 sacks, and 27 total tackles in 2023. Did not have a great year last year, but he comes in, should be part of this defensive line. Probably a guy you want to see coming off on the left side of the edge. I think he's got good footwork and some solid hands there as well to be potentially involved in that defensive line. Clive Levin is a great add from Coastal Carolina, in my opinion. Previously played in JUCO rank, guy from near my area, just across the river from the county. I grew up in New York and Suffern, New York, so from the upstate New York area. Played previously at Army and now ends up at Coastal Carolina. He's a guy that's got high upside, right? He looked good at times for Coastal Carolina. Could really be a big impact player potentially off the right side. I like the speed of him, 6'3", 245. Could be certainly a solid asset for this team. 2 new edge rushers there on both sides of the line. Denzel Lowry was solid at times, right? 51 total tackles last year, 3 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks. Were good numbers for a school in Old Dominion. I think he comes in here and you could plug him in and really get good impacts out of him on the interior. A solid guy, a bit undersized, but still someone that you could work with. And then Jerry Lawson did not do a whole lot at Abilene Christian, but he's a player that still has a lot of room to develop. A guy that's got some good experience, about almost 300 pounds as well. So he's a big run clogging guy that's solid in the interior there. These are decent adds. I think these are 4 guys that can have impacts early on this team. I like what they did in the edge department. It's obviously not ideal bringing in 2 brand new edge rushers, but I think these are guys that need a new lease on life, and they could be really solid for this defensive line.
Now let's go ahead and talk Miller Moss, Nick, because this is a very exciting addition. In the first year under Brom, they won 10 games, went to the conference title game with Jack Plummer, who I thought would be better for them. He ended up being just disastrous, and he's the reason why they lost that conference championship game. Tyler Shaw, he's been in college a long time, but has never really been able to get on the field until this past season. He was a lot better than I thought he would be. 3,200 yards, 24 total touchdowns. Miller Moss, I think, is certainly better than both of them. And he's, it's crazy how things come full circle in this sport, right, Nick? His first career start came in 2023 in that bowl game, the Holiday Bowl, against Louisville. He completed 70%, 372, 6 touchdowns. His 1 interception was at the goal line, so he almost had 7 scores that day. And that performance led to Will Howard fully going to Ohio State because it looked like USC was the favorite to land him in the portal. They ended up pushing back on that because they had their guy for 2024. And now Moss ends up at Louisville, Nick. I know that's a mouthful, but it's crazy how things can happen full circle in sports.
It is kind of crazy how that ended up working out, right? That game against the Cardinals in the bowl game, you and I both felt like USC had no chance there. It seemed like they were a depleted roster that had no energy, no motivation, even though they were playing close to home on the West Coast in San Diego. It felt like they just didn't care and that Louisville would have a chance to really run away and absolutely dominate them. But Miller Moss came out there and looked like he was the next big thing. You and I were texting the entire game and we're stunned at the performance in the Holiday Bowl. He absolutely lit it up, and it felt like, hey, USC's found their next guy. He found the guy that Lincoln Riley can turn into another star, just like he did with the previous quarterbacks that went on to win a Heisman, were drafted first overall. The pedigree of Lincoln Riley. It didn't quite work out. I thought Miller Moss, I think it got a bit of a tough stick out there in LA. I really figured that he would have been able to rock out the full season. They made the move, yeah, sure, I can understand it to a degree. I would have stuck with him personally, but then again, I'm not a head coach in college football for a reason. 2,500 yards passing, 65% comp rate, 18 touchdowns and 9 picks was certainly a problem. But now with less pressure, playing in a system where he can really sort of develop his skills, I think this could be a really solid add. This wide receiver room returns some decent production, even if it loses its top receiver. This is a kid that's got a ton of upside still at 6'2", 205. I love the size of him, love the arm strength, love the accuracy at times as well. The turnovers certainly got to work on that, but this is a kid that can be very accurate and very dominant in the pocket. I think they've landed themselves a phenomenal quarterback here, and they could really work well in this system. I think the coaching staff here with this Cardinals team is phenomenal, and you could really plug in a guy like this who could really succeed, hit a really high ceiling very quickly.
Breaking things down when it comes to Miller Moss, I think this is a very good quarterback. As a USC fan, I was excited for him, and I thought he played very well in spurts. This is a guy who averaged 284 yards per game, led them from behind to take a late lead against Michigan on the road early on in the year, where the offensive line was getting flat out obliterated in that contest. They should have beat Penn State, but of course they blew that one. He didn't play perfect in that contest. The last start he had was against Washington, where he had 3 picks along with almost 300 yards and a couple of touchdowns. And I think that was the final straw for Lincoln Riley, because not only did he lack the mobility to kind of uplift this offense with a poor offensive line, of course that's not his fault, right? But he was also starting to force throws, was doing a poor job diagnosing against zone. But in that same game, he also had some elite throws, and I think that's what you saw at times. I remember couple weeks into the year, Nick, he was crawling in the top 10 on NFL mock drafts, which was certainly crazy to see. But that's the kind of upside he was generating. This is a player that showcases good to short, intermediate accuracy, throws with confidence against tight windows. He's a really good distributor of the football. I think he throws on the run very impressively, has a good arm overall in terms of strength. He can loft it downfield. The deep accuracy, though, is certainly a little iffy. The arm strength isn't elite by any means, but I think it's pretty good. The vision can be poor, like I was alluding to. Doesn't always step up in the pocket. This is an offense where they're going to be looking to get the ball out a little bit quicker here at Louisville. I think that this is a perfect fit for Miller Moss, top to bottom, Nick. Of course, there's some reports that maybe he wasn't that good of a teammate. I spoke to Jonah Monheim at the Senior Bowl, and he kind of indicated the same thing, even though he didn't flat out say it. So maybe that's something that's a concern. But I think, new party for all involved, Nick, would be great here. I think Miller Moss is going to do a great job, and I think some of these negatives he's going to put behind him this year.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there. I think this is a quarterback that's got a ton of high upside, and this is a kid that can be really involved in this offense and be really solid for this team. They had two quarterbacks in Plummer and Shao that, was a mixed bag with both of them. They were two guys where expectations were all over the place kind of, but they ended up having decent enough seasons. Plummer was not phenomenal for this team, but Tyler Shao was a lot better than a lot of people expected. I think Miller Moss can be really good for this team. I think the fit makes a lot of sense for me, and this is another quarterback that Brom can really work with.
Now let's move to the secondary. This is another part of the portal. Also got a big retooling. This was a good secondary thought last year in terms of talent, but they had some issues despite having guys like Quincy Riley who were very impressive. Corey Thornton was a top corner for him as well. They went into the portal, though, and snagged, 5 guys here. They're going to compete for starting 6 guys. That is, they're going to compete for playing time across the board. We'll start with the guy from Jacksonville State, 3-yard player at that being Jabari Mack. That is for the Gamecocks. He was an above-average player for him. Rodney Johnson, 6'2", 200, has some nice size. He was very impressive for Southern at the FCS level. Justin Agu, likely won't start. He's a veteran. He's weak versus the run. Didn't make much waves in coverage, but he's certainly going to be helpful for depth purposes, I would assume. What they did at safety, though, I think was good. JoJo Evans from FIU. He was a first-time All-CUSA, nearly 100 tackles. He was a greatly efficient player in that regard. Corey Gordon, he's a nice ball hawk from Baylor. Wasn't all that good in coverage, though, but he was a stout run defender. They're bringing in some nice ball players here in the safety group, Nick. But run stopping wasn't an issue for him last year. It was coverage. So I'm certainly wondering what these guys are going to bring to the table since they already kind of thrive in what the team did good last year. We need bigger players in coverage in the safety group.
Sort of a gamble bringing in a guy like Gordon who's really good against the run and not a great coverage asset like you were alluding to there. A guy that had some success at Baylor, 34 total tackles last year, 3 picks as well, 2 pass breakups, pretty solid, decent numbers there, 1.5 sacks for him. Just a really good run stopper, has really good field vision in that regard. Not the best coverage asset, but had some games of positive moments. Had 5 tackles against West Virginia and an interception in that one. Also had 5 tackles against Oklahoma State and Texas Tech, so some decent production there. I think he's a guy you can plug in and get some high upside out of, about 6'2", about 200 pounds, 190, depending on where you look. So this is a guy that could be really solid for this team. I think he's a decent add. I think Mack from Jacksonville State is a really good guy. This is a guy that's got some good experience playing at the Conference USA level. 32 total tackles for him last year, 2 picks, 11 pass breakups. That's the key number there, right? 11 pass breakups. This guy was really good as a coverage asset, probably the best pure coverage asset they picked up in the portal, who can be really good for this team. I think he's a solid add, certainly from Jacksonville State. Rodney Johnson coming over from Southern at the FCS level. Will the jump be tough for him? Certainly, but I think this is a guy that still has a lot of talent and a lot of untapped potential playing in college football for a little bit here. Justin Agu is a solid add from Louisiana as well. 4 pass breakups for him last year, 36 total tackles. But the coverage, certainly another liability there potentially, but a guy that you could kind of develop. And then JoJo Evans from FIU is also at Kent State and Marshall. So he's bounced around a lot. A ton of tackles for him last year. 93 total tackles, 7 pass breakups, 2 picks, 2.5 tackles for loss. He was a do-it-all guy for that team last year at FIU. Got a lot of good minutes. I think he's ready to take that big next step forward here. I think he's a really solid add out of the portal. They could potentially get a lot out of him at strong safety. He's a really talented asset, and I think he can be the best player, maybe besides Mack, that they added in this secondary, a really talented player they added in Evans.
The secondary overall, I thought they were good at times, but for the most part, they really got cooked. Against Washington, the bowl game was tough. Against Miami, that was tough, of course, but that's everybody, so no real slouch there. Against Notre Dame, they had a coverage bust. SMU almost had 300 yards. The Clemson game, though, for example, it was a great one. I think the D-line performance certainly helped. It's a great example of a game where they showed a lot of length, though, but at times they benefited from mistakes like bad balls and whatnot, bad passing offenses that they played. So the secondary has to get better. Even The Stanford game, I think, is a great example of how they got burned in man. Even Quincy Riley struggled significantly in that game. So I really don't know if the secondary is going to improve. We'll make a final verdict on that in a couple months when we do our prediction for this team. But I think it's going to be hard for them to move forward in the secondary. Moving to some of the key returnees that are exciting, Nick. On offense, they have a standout center in Pete Nigra. A couple of guys on the interior, guys like Austin Collins, Renato Brown. Things you have to figure out. But I really like what they have on the interior. But the real juicy stuff is what they have at receiver. Chris Bell, he ended up emerging big time for them this past year. 6'2", 220. He's a pure outside wide receiver. Made a lot of plays downfield for them. Only had 4 touchdowns. All big ones, though. You certainly want to see more consistency, though. You don't want him to just be a big play guy only. More consistency in terms of production. I think he can march forward toward this 1,000-yard season. Colin Lacey, he missed games early on in the year, ended up playing 4 in a row, and I think that they held him out for the rest of the season to preserve his red shirt. I don't know if that's official or not, but I think that's kind of what it seems like, because he was fully healthy for the bowl game, and there was no talk about his health for over a month before that contest. Colin Lacey is a phenomenal player. He had that big breakout season at South Alabama 2 years ago. He's a versatile player who can play outside, but mainly in the slot. Good intermediate weapon with good ball tracking and yards after catch. Doesn't have elite speed, but he's still very impressive as a runner. Runs a great slot fade as well, so he could be a red zone option for him, Nick. I know they're very excited to have Lacey back as a full-time player in terms of health this year.
This is a really solid room. I think Chris Bell is a great player who started to break out. 737 for him, 17.1 yards per grab and 4 scores. Second highest receiver in all those numbers there, 56 yards per game for him through the air. Solid numbers there. I think Lacey's a guy that could be really good for this team. About 200 yards receiving last year for him, a touchdown and 10 yards per grab for him. So he's a guy that you want to expect big things out of. I think the tight end room is solid for this team as well. They have some solid depth and experience there with Kariski and Skinner, 2 guys that have got solid reps last year for this team. So I like the way this looks for this offense. This is an offensive unit that's really solid. Yes, it's tough to lose Huggins, Bruce, and Ja'Cory Brooks, but these are 2 guys that are really solid, and Bell and Lacey, they can step up and be targets for Miller Moss early on.
TJ McWilliams, he was another one of those transfers. He should have a good role in this offense. Seems like he'll fit the offensive system well, so they'll probably have a nice trio. Another guy we didn't talk about, Bobby Golden from Akron. So this is a receiving group that has some experience across the board now and a variety of different skill sets, so I really am happy with what they have there. And of course, Isaac Brown, we just talked about this kid the other day, Nick, because we did our top 10 running backs video. He ended up making that list. This is a guy that was very impressive. Some of the notes on him was that he uses leverage in the blocking scheme very well, has home run speed, does a good job of finding run lanes at the second level. And this is an incredibly deep backfield. He's a rising sophomore, as is Duke Watson, and then you have a redshirt sophomore, Keon Brown. This was a by-committee approach for the early part of last season before Isaac Brown took over the lead role, but this was a very productive backfield, Nick, and they have a 3-headed monster here for Louisville.
Yeah, this Isaac Brown, talented running back here. He's such a good young player for this team. 1,100 yards on the ground, 7.1 yards per attempt, and 11 scores for him. 90 yards per game on the ground as well. Was a threat in the passing game as well with 30 receptions and a touchdown there. So really good numbers. A solid breakout freshman season for him. Duke Watson had a good year as well. 600 yards rushing, 8.9 yards per carry on limited touches, 7 touchdowns, and about 50 yards per carry for him. He is a good red zone threat. He can really be involved in this offense going forward. And then Keanu Brown as well was solid for this team with 245 and 3 scores. There's, that's a lot of production right there. You're looking at 21 returning touchdowns on the ground from last year. I think that's a really solid start. Bodes well for this offense. I wouldn't be surprised to see them run the ball maybe a little bit more this year than they have in previous years in Jeff Brom's system. But I like what they have with this running back room. All young guys that don't have a lot of miles on them yet. They can take a lot of touches, take a lot of hits here. They can be involved in this offense. I really like what this rushing attack can certainly do.
Now look at the defense real quick. This is a team that's not as juicy on this side of the ball. I think collectively can be a really impressive group, though. TJ Quinn, he ended up leading the team with 82 tackles. Stanquan Clark, though, was a real specimen. This guy was very impressive. Really liked what he was able to do in the run defense department. Showed nice strength to get off blocks or meet running backs. Comes through gaps with real force. It was very impressive patrolling the line of scrimmage. This is a team at linebacker that we weren't sure how they performed last year because we talked about their youth. And this is what you get, right? Young guys who step up, being first and second in terms of tackles on the team. And now they're veterans, and you really expect them to take that next big level. Jordan Gerard up front, 6'2", 295 of a former CUSA transfer. I think he's going to do very well in his second season in this conference. I really like what he can do as a run stopper. And then you look at 2 DBs, Antonio Watts. He was a heck of a playmaker for him. He forced a big interception against Clemson. As their slot, ended up having 51 tackles, 6.5 TFL. so he's a nice player in that role. And then D'Angelo Hutchinson was also not bad himself as a safety. And of course, will those guys be in full-time roles moving forward? I think playing time's always going to be up for grabs this offseason for Louisville, but he was a standout in all areas as a box safety, so I think Hutchinson and Watts, though, even though there'll be competition, I think their roles are well-defined. What do you think of this defense, Nick? There's no real superstar standouts, but I think Stanquan Clark is really going to be driving up some draft boards over the next 12 months.
Yeah, I really like Clark a lot. He's a really talented player. The top returning tacklers, top 2 returning tacklers for this team come back, with Clark being number 2 at 76 total tackles, 8 tackles for loss for him, 2 pass breakups, 2 picks, 2 forced fumbles. I mean, he could do it all. Really solid numbers there. Quinn has been really solid for this team as well. 82 total tackles, 4 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks. Solid numbers there. Hutchinson, I like his game in the secondary. 52 total tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 3 pass breakups. And then Watts had a solid year as well at 51 total tackles, 7 tackles for loss, 4 pass breakups. Solid returning presence there. This team does lose a lot of talent on the defensive side of the ball. Ashton Giolotti is gone. Quincy Riley was a solid piece for them. Corey Thornton was not bad either. So they're losing those guys. That's certainly a lot of production, and that certainly is going to be tough to replace that. They went to the portal to try and do that. They bring back, the linebacking core is going to be the same unit from last year, which I think is really solid to have that continuity in the middle of your defense. I like what they have. Watts plays that star role where he's got a little more versatility, a little more opportunity to do some fun things and strong things for this defense. I think he can have a solid year as well. I'm not super concerned about this defense. I think this defense still is a really strong unit that can be involved. They gave up 24 points per game last year. I think they're kind of in that same similar mark. And in the ACC and where the schedule is set up, that's not a bad mark to be at by any chance of the imagination. And this team could be really solid this year.
Now, the original question, Nick, we swing it back to that was proposed. Is this team a sleeping giant in 2025? And I think the easiest way to answer that is look at this schedule. I mean, this is abysmal, but at the same time, you have a 3-game stretch to end the year that's going to make it or break it. You host Clemson. You beat the hell out of them on the road last year with ease, but if your secondary is struggling against a team that's really improved significantly on offense, that's not going to be a freebie by any means. At SMU, that's going to be difficult. And then Kentucky, it's a rivalry game, and, Stoops is hoping to have his boys back in touch this season. So that's a very tough 3-game stretch right there, Nick. You also have at Miami after a bye week, October 17th on a Friday night. Very winnable game. All of these are winnable games. Looking at the schedule, though, they're going to be in college football playoff consideration, but things can go from, great to absolute disaster over the final couple weeks, and it looks like that's a Friday night game currently hosted against Clemson, so that's very interesting. What do you make of the schedule?
This is a schedule that's not ridiculously tough when you look at it on the offset. There are 3 tough games on the schedule that certainly make a key point. 2 games on Friday. They travel to Miami on Friday, October 17th. That's a very fascinating game on a Friday night. They also host Clemson on Friday, November 14th. Those are the 2 biggest games, plus a trip to SMU in late November as well. And then, of course, the Governor's Cup against Kentucky is always a game that you got to keep an eye on. Kentucky had previously won, 5 in a row in that one, including a vacated win for 2021. But I'm going to count that. They had won 5 in a row before Louisville absolutely beat the brakes off them in 2024 and got some mojo back. That's a very streaky series, so hopefully the Cardinals can really build a streak. That's what their fans are certainly hoping for. I think Brown's been good so far, right? 10 wins in the first season, 9 wins last year, 19-8 overall. I think that's been really solid, and this schedule I think is favorable. The non-conference is a joke, really, outside of the Kentucky game, which is a guaranteed rivalry game. They don't play a whole lot of tough teams. The start of the schedule is not ridiculously tough either. At Pitt and Virginia, I think they're winnable games, and then you play Virginia Tech, Cal, and Boston College in the middle there. Those are all winnable games. Those 2 Friday games, those are the key games. Can they win on the road at Miami? Certainly going to be a tough test. Can they beat Clemson at home, a team they've really killed last year? Certainly a tough test as well. Those are 2 key games, very important games. I'm keeping an eye on this team, certainly. I love the coaching. I think the offense is really high-flying and a really solid unit. They had a great year last year with 36.5 points per game. I think they can get to 37, 38, 39, maybe even 40 points per game. This offense should be really high-flying and really solid this year. Will the defense be up to the same level? That's when you got to keep an eye on. A lot of new faces on the defensive side of the ball.
It's going to be it for today's episode. As always, make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.